Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. We're getting into the democracy weeds today. I'll have to push some of the news to the next episode because my research for this one has already made it quite tardy, but it's important. Part of what you might call our Better Understand Your Democracy segment. At least, that would be the family-friendly title. But there's also some exciting news on Yang. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. Thank you for having my back. While most election officials have proven mercifully loyal to democracy across the country, a canvasser board in Michigan's Wayne County yesterday saw 2 Republican members refuse to certify the votes for their county. Their justification was the now all too familiar voter fraud claims, for which they had no evidence, beyond pointing to some discrepancies between the vote count and votes received in the earlier primary. Those discrepancies amounted to a few hundred votes. Biden is ahead in Wayne County by approximately 100,000 times that much, making them immensely irrelevant to this election. Fortunately, just before the deadline, the Republican board members changed their votes, and the results were certified unanimously. An investigation will also be made into the discrepancies mentioned. That there was any chance or posturing as to not certifying the votes is disturbing evidence for the integrity of the ground on which our democracy now stands. There are also crowds of Trump supporters outside the State House calling for the legislature to cast illegitimate electors for Trump. If we don't do something to restore trust in democracy and truth in this country, it's only going to get worse until it breaks. But that brings us to our somewhat good news from Alaska today. Measure 2 for ranked choice voting, donation transparency, and open primaries has passed by a margin of 1%. Now, I say somewhat good because I only just realized that the term open primaries is being misused in this case. What they actually passed is jungle primaries, or top 4 primaries. Basically, they got rid of party primaries for state executive, legislative, and congressional offices. What makes this actually quite problematic is that they did not extend the use of RCV into the new primaries. It will only be used in the general election, and that goes for the presidential election as well. So why is this a problem? Well, as we discussed before, when you remove the party primaries, you can actually exacerbate vote splitting. In a party primary, any number of candidates can run without hurting the chances of that party in the general election because, presumably, all the party's voters will vote for whoever wins the nomination in the primary. Without that party primary, running more candidates from the same party splits the votes among them, diluting the number any one candidate gets and hurting their chances of beating candidates outside of their party. For example, say there are 10 Republican voters and 8 Democratic voters. The Republicans run 10 candidates who each get 1 vote, and the Democrats run 4 candidates who each get 2 votes. You end up with 4 Democrats and no Republicans in the general election in this case, even though Republicans outnumber Democrats. Party primaries would have presented the top candidate from each party. Now, that is obviously an exaggerated and simplified scenario, but it gets at the flaw. It's not that top 4 primaries can't work, but they need to be paired with a non-plurality voting system. If you had the same scenario with ranked choice voting, the least popular candidates on each side would get eliminated, and their votes would be transferred to the more popular candidates in each party, resulting in probably 2 of each party advancing to the general. The problem is that Measure 2 only uses RCV in the general election, not the primary, meaning there will be an incentive in the primary for each party to discourage too many candidates from running for fear of spoilers, reducing the opportunity for outsiders where it should be expanded. RCV only being used in the general for the presidential election also means that nothing will change in the party primaries there. Voters will still feel pressured to vote for one of the candidates expected to have a good chance of winning, for fear of their vote being wasted if they go for a long-shot candidate. RCV should be used in all primaries. That said, the good thing about Top 4, even without RCV, is that it might help candidates outside the duopoly. It does this simply by making more seats available in the general election and is very much the same logic as that for multi-member districts for congressional seats. Since we haven't talked about that before, this seems a good time. Basically, when you have one seat available, a diverse set of ideologies are inevitably going to coalesce into two parties. Let's say you have progressives, conservatives, libertarians, and humanity first, which we'll call pragmatics. The progressives and conservatives each have the support of about 30% of the voters. The pragmatics and libertarians each have 20%. Those smaller groups know that they don't have enough support for their candidate to win, so they are going to be in the same camp as voters and have to choose their favorite of the two ideologies that can win. Thus, you end up with two parties. If, on the other hand, there were 10 seats available, let's say, now it's different. The conservatives and progressives cannot each run 10 candidates without splitting their votes so much that they'd lose out to a smaller number of candidates from the smaller parties. Let's say that the conservatives and progressives each tried to run 10 candidates to win all 10 seats. Each candidate would have 1/10 of 30%, or 3%. If the smaller parties only ran 2 candidates each, they'd each have half of 20%, or 10% of the vote, easily beating the larger party's candidates. Quite simply, when there is only one winner, the bigger party wins everything. When there are multiple winners, the larger parties would not have enough votes to secure them all. They would need to concede some seats to the smaller parties in order to reliably win the rest and maintain a majority. It would end up something like 3 conservatives, 3 progressives, 2 libertarians, and 2 pragmatics in this case. And that would be an ideal result, as it would be proportional to the preferences of the voters. Everyone would have appropriate representation, which is the goal in democracy. Again, that's oversimplified to make the phenomenon clear, but that's the idea behind multi-member districts. You take, say, 5 electoral districts of a state, where each is currently voting for a single candidate to represent them, and you combine them into a single district that votes to fill 5 seats instead. At least that's my current understanding and what makes sense to me. Bear in mind that definitions are not universally agreed on, and I'm still a relative newcomer to politics. That said, multi-member districts would likely be the best change that could be made to support breaking the duopoly in America. It would also, as a happy side effect, invalidate gerrymandering, add it to the list of needed reforms. Unfortunately, it will likely be one of those that are extremely difficult to pass, since both parties will lose power if it does. The top 4 primary that Alaska passed is the same phenomenon as for multi-member districts. More seats in the general means a better chance for third parties to snag one. Unlike multi-member districts, it likely will not change their chances of winning the general election and actually getting a representative into office, but it's a step. If you want to learn more about how politics became as divisive and dysfunctional as it is today, and a good review of the potential fixes and how much effect they might have, there's an article below that I found quite concise and well written. Speaking of divisive dysfunction, Ted Cruz once again put himself forth as the poster child for everything wrong with politics and critical thinking in America. He retweeted Senator Sherrod Brown requesting that speakers in the Senate wear a mask to protect everyone in the room, especially including those sitting just a few feet in front of the speaker. In Ted's retweet, he mocked Brown for being afraid of catching the virus from 50 feet back and accused him of fake virtue signaling for trying to keep people safe from a deadly virus. There was literally a woman right in front of Dan Sullivan, the man Brown requested wear a mask, in the video. So, there's a number of options here. 1. Ted Cruz doesn't think that staffers are people. Quite possible. 2. Ted Cruz is stupid beyond all reason. 3. Ted Cruz doesn't care what the truth is. He will object to anything Democrats do and spin a false narrative around it to reinforce partisan vitriol and gridlock. Now, I can't say for sure which of these are the case, but I can say that none of them should be traits of a senator of the United States and speak loudly to the decline of rationality in America. From the bottom of my heart, screw you, Ted Cruz. Paget and Matt interviewed Andrew on their new Paget and Matt show on YouTube. I haven't had time to watch it yet, but I'll definitely get around to it. You can beat me to it at the link below. The Queen's University Student Union of Belfast is the latest organization to join in calling for a UBI in the UK. They passed a motion in support of both an immediate emergency UBI and a long-term UBI trial in Northern Ireland. Thank you, QU. Finally, CNN produced an article of the candidates in circulation among Biden allies for cabinet positions. There are some familiar names: Suzanne Rice as one possibility for Secretary of State, Bernie as potential Secretary of Labor, Keisha Lance Bottoms for Housing, my own governor, Jay Inslee, for the EPA, Buttigieg for UN Ambassador, and Biden already announced Ron Klain as his pick for Chief of Staff. But guess who's the only name under Secretary of Commerce? Andrew the Claw Yang. Okay, they didn't include his nickname, I added that. If we could just get John Yang to head a new Secretary of Technology position as well, we'd be all set. Still, these are just rumors at this point, but it's sounding increasingly hopeful. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the American Politics article, add multi-member districts to your list of reforms, advocate for voting reform in your state, send your thoughts to Ted Cruz, thank the Queen's University Union for supporting UBI. Don't forget to put in your half hour a day of phone banking or text banking to support the efforts in Georgia. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way. And don't forget to Yang Daily.